planned, I'm going to move us into our last indicator in this group, and then we will open it up, for questions and comments about both of these indicators. So now we're switching to post-school outcomes to round out this group. Indicator 14. There are some that if one does get into an argument at happy hour over what's the best indicator, and I mean really who doesn't, they argue that post-school outcomes is the ultimate indicator. That, they would say, I would think Amy and her team would say, that this really is about everything that we're doing, right, between the ages of 3 and 21, right, and certainly even before age 3. Is to get to this point about what's happening right after they leave us, after our students with disabilities leave high school. Are they enrolled in some sort of post-secondary education? Are they gainfully employed? Are they engaged in their communities, right? And so this indicator is really all about that, attempting to measure what happens for our students with disabilities 1 year after they leave high school. So it has 3 parts, so we are going to return to, more targets. The thing to note right off the bat about this indicator that can be confusing, but once, you kind of get a handle on it, you do get used to it. It is cumulative in nature, and so it builds upon itself. So it starts with 14A, right, the rate of students with disabilities who are enrolled in higher education 1 year after leaving high school. We'll break down, the definition of each of these terms next, but just to, kind of capture the cumulative nature here. So that's 14A, of all the students who left high school 1 year ago, how many of them are enrolled in higher education? And then 14B keeps, the same group who are enrolled in higher education and then adds to it how many of them are competitively employed. So it's an or, right? So we add 14A, and then we add competitively employed to them, and that's how we have 14B, right? They're either enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed in 14B. And then 14C further adds, right, to this measure of engagement by including the kids who are in 14A as well as in 14B, and then adds on those who are in some other post-secondary education or training option, but maybe don't meet the definition of higher education, or those who are in some form of employment, but don't meet the definition of competitive employment. So 14C is the most, right, inclusive, right? It would be where we'd want to see our highest engagement rates. So that's what we mean by it being cumulative. Okay, so with that in mind, let's break down these terms a little bit because that is important for understanding, how the indicator is measured. The first thing to note, as much as we would love to have this kind of data for all of our students with disabilities, right, 1 year after they leave high school, we don't have a mechanism, right, at least yet, for capturing that data statewide. It is certainly an undertaking. I know we probably have panel members who've done this survey or been part of it before, and it is a lot, to ask of our districts, and they do a phenomenal job of collecting these data. Some go above and beyond. They say we try to track down as many as we can, even if it's more than we're required to collect for the survey sample, because we want to know what's happening for our students after they leave us and how they reflect on the services, that we provided. But that being said, it does require a 2-year survey process. So the first is called an exit survey, and that is done the year of exit, right, from high school. And then what our school districts do is 1 year later, they follow up, or at least attempt multiple times to follow up with those same students to find out those things and more. We do go beyond the minimum in Ohio with our survey, not only to find out if they are employed or in higher ed or in some form of engagement, but also reflecting on what transition services they received during high school and if their goals and their current reality match, and kind of all that good stuff. So it is a big undertaking for this survey. We do partner with the Transition Center at Kent State University, as we've done for a lot of years, really even before this indicator as part of the Ohio Longitudinal Transition Study. So to note some terms, just so we're all on the same page about how these terms are defined. Enrolled in higher education, right, means that they have to be enrolled on a full-time or part-time basis in a community college or a college or university for at least one complete term at any time, since leaving high school. Competitive employment is, aligned to the definition of competitive integrated employment, which means that they're working at least 20 hours a week for at least 90 days since leaving high school, and it aligns to those conditions of competitive employment from the Rehabilitation Act. This further goes on, to and other post-secondary education or training means that they've been enrolled for a full or part-time basis for at least one complete term in some sort of other training program that doesn't meet the definition, for 14A of enrolled in higher ed. And similarly, some other employment means that they have worked for pay or they've been self-employed for at least 90 days since leaving high school. It might include working in a family business, but it doesn't meet the definition of competitive integrated employment. We've talked about the cumulative nature of the indicator. We essentially take all of our districts and community schools in Ohio and state-supported schools. Dana, don't want to leave out certainly Buckeye United, School for the Deaf and School for the Blind. Those are our state-supported schools. They're part of this as well. We divide them into 5 cohorts, and every 5 years, they take turns, right, collecting the exit data for the first year, and then 1 year later, working really hard to follow up with all of the students from the exit group to find out, what they're up to. Okay, so let's dig into some data. We'll take it one section at a time, just to try to break up, all of the data that we're looking at here. So we have first those students with disabilities who are enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving high school. You can see we have 6 years of data to look at. So we have, had a lot of consistency here in our survey, in our partnership with Kent State, that enables us to compare, over time. So we can see, that we have hovered in the high 20s in this area. We did have a sort of an anomaly year, and we got up to a 36% in 15-16. We've never been that high since, but we have, we've gotten closer to a 30%, and it's worth noting even in 1920, right, which we know was partially impacted by the pandemic. So it will be, once we get our 2021 data, which we know is fully impacted by the pandemic, it will be interesting, of course, to see the impact, that we have there. So that's where we are, just under 30%, right, when we think about just the subset who are enrolled in higher education. And looking at our denominator gives you a sense of, how many surveys are we collecting each year. So that is a place where the pandemic certainly had an impact, right? We had been right in the 1400s, which was like an all-time high, lots of efforts, right, at many levels to get more surveys. But of course, as expected, the pandemic did have an impact on the ability to follow up, right, and to track down everyone, and so we did drop quite a bit, down to just over 1,000 survey respondents for 1920. Okay, and now we can take that one step further and say, well, now that we know how we performed over time, how did we do in relation to our prior targets? So again, if you just looked at the colors without even looking at the data labels, you would know right away that, ooh, we only met our target 1 out of the last 6 years, right? For each of the other years where we have those red bars, we did not meet our targets. And you can see our targets, were certainly rather ambitious, starting in the mid 30% range and trying to get up to 39, almost to a 40% in this area. And so we have been sort of off track, right, and have not really come close, to our targets, our prior targets. So with that in mind, let's talk about a couple of target options. Again, just for the higher ed group, and then we'll build on that. So we know that our baseline is sort of a challenge, right? Our baseline is high, right, relative to our current performance. And the reason that's important to note is we still have to meet the requirement to show improvement over baseline by the 25-26 school year, even if we think of that as sort of an artificially high baseline. It sort of is what it is in terms of the parameters for our target setting. So in order to meet that requirement to be above 39.6, right, in the final year of targets, we are acknowledging, you know, kind of where we're starting from here in option A at being under 30%. Again, sort of guesswork, right? We need to plug in the 2021 data as soon as we have it. We don't know how much lower it will be or if it would be higher. But then each year after just shows kind of an annual increment of growth to get us above baseline by 25-26. So just kind of steadily increasing, and then because it is a more conservative approach, it waits for that big jump until the end, right? Hopefully getting past the pandemic. Some of our programmatic considerations might help to improve in this area. So it does show a jump, you know, of almost, or I guess it is a little bit over, right, 5 percentage points from 24-25 to 25-26, again, to be above the baseline of 39.6. So in order to get to a 39.6, we would need 105 more students with disabilities surveyed to be enrolled in higher education 1 year after leaving high school. All right, so for comparison, let's take a look at option B. So option B is slightly, you know, more rigorous, but not a lot more rigorous, just again in recognition that our prior targets were pretty rigorous and we were not on track to meet them, except for that 1 year. So it does show a little bit more growth earlier on and just steady growth, right, throughout, ending at a slightly higher rate, ending at a 40% above base, you know, above the 39.6 baseline relative to option A. So by comparison, that would require just a few more, right, 108 more students compared to 105 to be enrolled in higher ed, since we're only talking about, you know, a 39.65 versus a 40%. So these are two really fairly similar options, both bound, of course, by the requirement to be above baseline. So that is really where that comes into play. All right, so that is 14A. Let's build on that with 14B. Here's where we keep all of the kids who are, I shouldn't call them kids now, right? They've graduated, goodness. These young adults have graduated. They're either enrolled in higher ed or they're competitively employed. So we build on that, and so we can see the impact that that has. Our engagement rate certainly shoots up, right? When we can count and distinguish, right, between our students who are enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed, we do get up to, in some cases, some years we've been well above 70%. It swings a little bit in the 1920 year, still at 79%, which was higher than we anticipated, given the pandemic impacts, you know, to still be to really show growth, right, from 18-19. Of course, the question will be, again, you know, how much different does that look for 2021? So then as we consider, right, these same data, we can then look at, well, how do we do against our prior targets for 14B? And a little bit of a mix. They still prove to be more rigorous, right, than they were attainable for us. We did meet them in 2 of the years, including the most recent year. Certainly being at the getting to that 79%, we exceeded our 75% target. but the other 4 years, we did not meet them. So then going into some target options. So in this case, we're dealing with a much more manageable baseline, right? In fact, we started much lower at our baseline and have improved, quite a bit from that 62.7. So we don't have the same challenge that we have with 14A because of the nature of that baseline. So this one we're free to just think about, what is rigorous yet attainable, for growth in both of these areas when we add competitively employed and enrolled in higher ed. So option A, again, hold steady at 2021. We'll update that when we can, and then just increases by 1 percentage point each year to end at an 84%. Doing so would require 63 more students to be either enrolled in higher ed or competitively employed within 1 year of leaving high school. By comparison, option B has just more growth, right? So it would be looking at this. Yep, it starts earlier and just increases by 2 percentage points, then ending at an 89% in the final year. So by comparison, that would require 105 more students versus 63 for option A. All right, we are almost done building for indicator 14. So now we add in our third group, and that's the some other group, right? Some other education or training, some other employment. You can see adding them in, we do go up slightly, but not by a lot, right? In our most recent year, we do get up to an 86.35%, but just comparing that to where we left off in in 14 B, we're at 79%. So we increase when we add in the final group from roughly 79% to 86.3%. So the bulk of our students surveyed are in, competitive employment or higher ed. So then looking at how we have done in relation to our targets, this is where we have had success, right, in all but one of the last 6 years. So 5 out of the last 6 years, we have met or exceeded our targets for 14C, with the exception of the 17-18 year. A bit of a difference compared to A and B, where we have struggled more. Right, so then looking at, again, kind of same deal with 14C, our baseline was a lot lower. We've improved really by 20 percentage points over the last 10 years, which is awesome, right? To think about while maintaining a very consistent survey and survey methodology. So certainly something to celebrate, right? We want to get in those celebrations wherever we can. We know progress is often measured in baby steps, right? So this is a place where we've improved from 66% roughly at baseline all the way up to 86 in our most recent year. So with that in mind, option A takes the 1 percentage point, right, per year growth approach, ending at a 91% in the final year, which, wow, to have targets that are at or above 90%, that is certainly new territory for us. And so getting there, right, getting to a 91% would require 49 more students to count in that most inclusive group, right, in 14C, with all of them included in that cumulative count. By comparison, then, option B would be even more rigorous, certainly by far the most rigorous targets that we've ever considered for, for 14C, showing higher increments of growth and ending at a 96%, engagement rate, which is certainly what we would want, right? Wouldn't we love to follow up with even a subset of our students with disabilities and find that 96% of them, are engaged in one or more of these categories 1 year out from high school. But by comparison, that would require 101 more students to be engaged in order to meet option B. Okay, and then the last page of this are those programmatic considerations, as I said before, real similar to the ones for graduation and dropout. All right.